In the elevator, my shadow suddenly stood on its tiptoes and kissed the shadow of a stranger beside me. The next second, a strange force yanked my body forward. Among the gasps around us, my lips crashed precisely into that man's lips. His eyes widened in shock, and I saw on the wall, his dark shadow was excitedly hugging mine, spinning around in pure happiness. My brain crashed for 3 seconds. The warm, soft sensation from my lips mixed with his crisp woody scent, wrapping around me completely. Dead silence surrounded us, followed by sharp intakes of breath and muffled exclamations. I jerked back, my back slamming against the elevator wall, my face burning hot enough to fry an egg. "I'm so sorry," I apologized frantically, wishing I could bury my head in the ground. The man in front of me wore a sharp suit, tall and commanding, creating his own powerful aura just by standing there. His brow was furrowed, his devastatingly handsome face filled with shock. It was James Mitchell, our company's new CEO, the legendary ruthless business titan who showed no mercy. And I was Emma Collins, just a regular admin assistant who'd worked here 3 years without even knowing which way his office door opened. Yet today, in front of all the executives in this elevator, I had forcibly kissed him. The elevator dinged open. The executives filed out, shooting me looks of contempt, pity, and gleeful schadenfreude as they passed. I wanted to die right there. James didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the wall behind me. I stiffly followed his line of sight. My shadow, the culprit, was now being held in his shadow's arms, head resting on its shoulder in perfect domestic bliss. And James's shadow was leaning down, planting kiss after kiss on my shadow's forehead. James's face darkened even more. He finally looked at me, his eyes cold as ice. "Emma Collins, my office." Now great, this wasn't just death. I was heading straight to the crematorium. I followed James, feeling like a prisoner being led to execution. His straight, cold back seemed to step on my death countdown with every stride. The office break room was already buzzing with whispers. "Oh my God. That Emma is so bold. Throwing herself at CEO Mitchell in public? I bet she's desperate for attention, trying to climb the ladder with these tactics. Doesn't she know who she's dealing with? Just wait and see. She'll be packing her bags in 10 minutes. Their words stabbed into my ears like needles. I clenched my fists, unable to defend myself. How could I explain that my shadow has its own mind, fell in love with the CEO's shadow, and forced me to perform this public assault? Who would believe that? The CEO's office door closed behind me, shutting out all outside noise. I kept my head down, staring at my shoes, waiting for final judgment. "Look up," James's voice commanded. Emotionless, I reluctantly raised my head to meet his unfathomable eyes. He sat behind his massive desk, fingers interlaced, studying me like I was some lifeless object. "Explain." I opened my mouth but couldn't say a word. "You thought this would get my attention?" His voice dripped sarcasm. Pretty low-class method. Blood rushed to my head. No, it was my shadow. Before I could finish, James's shadow emerged from behind him, opening its arms toward mine in a "come here for a hug" gesture. My shadow immediately broke free from my feet and ran toward his. They embraced midair, rolling around together. James's temple twitched. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath. And when he reopened them, the ice in his gaze seemed to crack slightly. So he pointed at the 2 shadows being affectionate on the wall. "You're telling me they're dating?" I nodded frantically like I'd found a lifeline. "Yes, I can't control it. It has its own thoughts." James fell silent. Only our breathing filled the office, along with the bizarre scene of 2 shadows silently showing affection on the wall. After a long moment, he pulled out a document from his drawer and pushed it toward me. "Sign it." I looked down and my pupils dilated in shock. Shadow Behavior Restraint and Confidentiality Agreement. The content was brutally simple. Until we found a solution to the shadow problem. I, Emma Collins, must cooperate with James Mitchell 24/7 to ensure no more elevator incidents occurred. In return, he wouldn't fire me and would pay substantial emotional damage compensation. The most ridiculous clause was the last one. Both parties must attempt to make their respective shadows break up. I was completely stunned. What was this? Breaking up a shadow couple? Seeing my hesitation, James added, Or you can leave the company right now and pay for the reputational damage and emotional trauma you caused me today. I had no doubt he'd actually do it. I picked up the pen and signed my name with trembling hands. Good. James collected the agreement. Starting now, you're moving to the executive secretary office. I looked up sharply. Why? He pointed to the corner. Our shadows had somehow joined hands and were trying to phase through the wall to the adjacent lounge. James said expressionlessly, so we can conveniently break up this couple anytime, anywhere. My first day in the executive secretary office was torture. This was the company's power center, with VPs constantly coming and going, and I, a humble admin, sat here like a husky who'd wandered into a wolf pack, especially the head secretary, Sarah White, whose poisonous glares could kill. Sarah was known as the CEO's admirer, capable, beautiful, and probably thought I was some scheming woman who'd climbed up through dirty tricks. Emma, photocopy these documents 100 times. Must be in the conference room by 3 p.m. She slammed a mountain of papers on my desk. Emma, Mr. Mitchell's coffee needs to be hand ground, exactly 185 degrees. Go make it, Emma. The plants downstairs have yellow leaves. Go deal with it. I became her personal servant. I didn't dare resist, just endured silently. After all, I was in the wrong. During lunch, I was eating a sandwich when James walked out of his office. I immediately put down my food and sat up straight. He walked past without looking at me. But the moment he passed, my shadow suddenly shot out from under me and hugged his leg. James stopped mid-step. I was terrified, wishing I could crawl into a crack in the floor. Every eye in the secretary office focused on us. Sarah's gaze was especially venomous, like she wanted to carve chunks out of me. James looked down at the clear shadow outline wrapped around his leg, then at me. He said nothing, just dragged my shadow into the break room. I felt an invisible force pulling me, my body involuntarily following him. In the break room, he closed the door. This is what you call cooperation? His voice was ice cold. I wasn't paying attention. I nearly cried. Then pay attention every second. He growled. Just then his shadow emerged from behind him, crouched down, and gently patted my shadow's head. My shadow immediately stopped and sweetly nuzzled his hand. James and I fell silent. Even shadows couldn't escape the sickening romance. The atmosphere was awkward beyond belief. James rubbed his temples and grabbed a water bottle from the fridge. We need to find a way to separate them. How? I asked. James twisted open the water bottle, took a sip, then glanced at the wall. Our shadows were sitting on the floor together now. Mine had somehow produced a tiny flower. His shadow accepted it shyly. I wanted to pass away. We start with basic observation. James said coldly. Figure out patterns, triggers, distance limits. He looked at me. From now on, you stay within my line of sight. I nearly choked. All day. All day. My shadow had already climbed into his shadow's lap. James's jaw tightened. Especially all day. By the afternoon, the entire executive floor had entered rumor apocalypse mode. Every time James walked somewhere, I followed behind him like a cursed duckling. Meeting room, project review, financial briefing, coffee break, everywhere. The worst part was our shadows. They acted like newlyweds separated by war every single time we were more than 3 feet apart. At one point, James entered a meeting before me. The second the door closed between us, my shadow started pounding on the floor dramatically while his shadow on the other side shoved desperate hands under the crack beneath the door. The VPs watched in horrified silence as 2 shadows reenacted a tragic romance. James opened the door again with a terrifying expression. Get in. Yes, sir. Things got worse around evening. Much worse. James was reviewing documents while I organized files nearby. The office was quiet, peaceful. Then my shadow quietly scooted its chair closer to his. His shadow immediately noticed. The 2 shadows looked at each other. And before I could react, his shadow pulled out a shadow ring. A ring. I froze. James froze. My shadow covered its mouth in shocked happiness, then nodded furiously. The shadow ring slid onto its finger. I slapped both hands over my face. No, 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 no. James stood up so abruptly his chair screeched across the floor. What, he said slowly, was that? I don't know. On the wall, Our shadows were now hugging each other emotionally like they'd just completed a 10-year love story. James stared at them with the same expression people probably had before suffering a stroke. Then suddenly, knock knock. The office door opened. Sarah stepped inside carrying documents. Mr. Mitchell, these need your SI. She stopped. Completely. Her eyes slowly lifted to the wall. To the two embracing shadows. To the shadow engagement ring. Then to me. The silence was deadly. Sarah's smile twitched. Am I interrupting something? No, James said instantly. Yes. Our shadows said silently with their entire bodies. Sarah placed the files down very carefully. I see. You don't, I said weakly. She looked at me like she hoped lightning would strike me specifically. Then her gaze shifted again. Because James's shadow had dipped mine dramatically like a movie-ending kiss. Sarah inhaled sharply. James finally snapped. Out. Sarah fled. The door slammed shut. I buried my face into the desk. We're finished, I muttered. Tomorrow the whole company's going to think I seduced you through dark magic. James was quiet for a moment. Then unexpectedly, he laughed. Just once. Low and short. I looked up in complete shock. Because James Mitchell, the terrifying CEO who made senior executives cry during meetings, was actually laughing. He noticed my expression and immediately went cold again. You heard nothing. But you laughed. You're hallucinating. Before I could answer, the office lights suddenly flickered. Once. Twice. Then completely went out. Darkness swallowed the room. I jumped. And on the wall, our shadows became clearer than ever under the moonlight from the giant windows. Mine immediately ran into his arms. But this time something was different. The shadows turned toward us simultaneously. Then James's shadow pointed directly at the couch. My shadow nodded enthusiastically. A horrible feeling crawled up my spine. Why are they looking at the couch? I whispered. James went very still beside me. Then his shadow gave him a thumbs up. My shadow gave me one too. James spoke with the exhausted calm of a man approaching psychological collapse. I think, he said, our shadows are trying to set us up. No, I said immediately. James answered at the exact same time. Absolutely not. On the wall, our shadows looked deeply offended. Then, in perfect synchronization, they turned their backs on us. Mine crossed its arms dramatically. His shadow shook its head like a disappointed parent. This is insane, I whispered. James loosened his tie with visible irritation. They are shadows. They should not possess emotional complexity. His shadow ignored him and walked to the couch alone. Mine followed. The two sat there together miserably. Sulking. I stared. They're guilt-tripping us. James stared too. Apparently. The lights flickered back on. The moment they did, both shadows instantly resumed pretending to be normal shadows attached to our feet. Except mine was still facing away from me. I was being given the silent treatment by my own shadow. Fantastic. James exhaled slowly. Go home. I blinked. Really? You look one inconvenience away from fainting. Honestly accurate. I grabbed my bag with relief. Good night, Mr. Mitchell. I made it exactly 3 steps toward the door before an invisible force yanked me backward. I stumbled straight into James's chest. Strong arms caught me automatically before I could fall. And beneath us, our shadows were hugging each other's legs for dear life. James closed his eyes. Of course. I wanted to cry. Why are they like this? As if answering me, his shadow pointed at the clock on the wall. 9:47 p.m. Then both shadows made sleeping gestures. James and I went silent. No, I said slowly. They can't possibly mean. His expression became grim. They don't want us separating overnight. That's illegal. They're shadows. That doesn't make it less illegal. My shadow was now fake crying on the floor. His shadow patted it comfortingly while glaring at us accusingly. James pinched the bridge of his nose hard enough to leave marks. This is harassment. What do we do? He looked at me. I looked at him. Then both of us looked toward the luxurious private lounge attached to his office. One couch. One resting area. One bedroom for executives who stayed overnight during emergencies. Absolutely not. No, I said instantly. Agreed. James said instantly. Our shadows perked up hopefully. We are not sleeping here together. The shadows collapsed dramatically in despair. I tried to take another step toward the door. The invisible force immediately tightened around my waist like a rope. I lurched backward again. This time James caught me before I even lost balance, like he expected it. Unfortunately, due to momentum, my hands landed against his chest. Very solid chest. Warm. Firm. My brain stopped functioning. His gaze dropped to my face. For one horrifying second, neither of us moved. Then our shadows in the background started cheering. Actually cheering. Jumping up and down while holding hands. James released me like I was on fire. We're testing distance limits, he said stiffly. Yes. Purely scientific. Obviously. Silence. Then from the wall, my shadow gave his shadow a flirtatious little twirl. James abruptly turned away. You'll take the bedroom, he said. I nearly inhaled my own soul. What? I'll stay in the office. That's worse. How is that worse? Because then I'll feel like I forced my CEO out of his own room after assaulting him in an elevator. You did assault me in an elevator. I said I was sorry. A pause. Then very quietly. I know. The anger in his voice had faded for the first time all day. And somehow that was far more dangerous. Because when James Mitchell wasn't icy and ruthless, he became unfairly attractive. I looked away immediately. Bad idea. On the wall, our shadows had somehow produced candles. Tiny shadow candles. And were slow dancing. I made a strangled sound. James stared at the wall for a long moment. Then muttered with deep exhaustion. I'm beginning to understand why people drink heavily. You don't drink. I asked weakly. James loosened another button on his collar. Not enough for this. Our shadows were now swaying together in imaginary candlelight. Mine rested its head on his shoulder. His shadow kissed its forehead with devastating tenderness. I pointed accusingly at the wall. See? That. That's emotional manipulation. James looked genuinely offended. Why are they more emotionally mature than most couples? That's not helping. A long silence settled over the office. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered beneath the night sky. Inside, the atmosphere was painfully awkward. Then my stomach growled. Loudly. I froze. James looked at me. I wanted death. I skipped dinner, I admitted quietly. His expression shifted slightly. Why? Because Sarah worked me like a Victorian orphan all day. But I definitely wasn't stupid enough to complain about his favorite secretary. Busy, I mumbled. James studied me for a second too long. Then he picked up his phone. 10 minutes later, a private elevator delivered food directly upstairs. Not cheap food either. Real restaurant food. Steak. Pasta. Soup. Tiny desserts arranged like artwork. I stared at the table in disbelief. This probably costs more than my rent. James sat across from me. Then eat slowly. I tried to maintain dignity. I truly did. Unfortunately, the first bite nearly made me ascend spiritually. James watched silently while I forgot every social skill I possessed. You were actually starving, he observed. I froze mid-bite. No. You inhaled mashed potatoes. They were emotional support potatoes. To my horror, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Not a full smile. But close. Dangerously close. On the wall, our shadows clutched each other excitedly like fans witnessing a romance scene. Traitors. I focused aggressively on my soup. So, I said carefully, have your shadows always been alive? James's expression flattened immediately. No. The sudden coldness in his voice made me glance up. He was staring at his glass. The first incident happened 3 months ago. I blinked. 3 months. He nodded once. At first it was minor. My shadow moving slightly differently from me. Looking at things independently. His jaw tightened. Then it started reacting emotionally. I slowly lowered my spoon. You knew something was wrong before the elevator? Yes. Then why didn't you say anything earlier? James gave me a long look. Would you have believed me? Fair point. I thought about the terrifyingly affectionate shadow proposal earlier. Then another realization hit me. Wait, I said slowly. If your shadow's been sentient for months. James already knew what I was about to ask. His face darkened instantly. Yes, he said flatly. That means my shadow fell in love with yours at first sight. We both turned toward the wall. Our shadows were feeding each other imaginary cake. I covered my face again. This is humiliating. James leaned back in his chair, watching the shadows with narrowed eyes. They weren't always this bold. What changed? As soon as I asked, both shadows froze. Then slowly, very slowly, they turned toward us. For the first time all day, the playful energy disappeared. A strange chill crept through the room. My shadow reached toward me urgently. James's shadow stepped protectively in front of it. And then, the office lights flickered again. Harder this time. The temperature dropped sharply. James stood immediately. What's wrong? Neither shadow answered. But on the opposite wall, a third shadow appeared. Not connected to either of us. Tall, distorted, and smiling. My breath caught, because although there was no body attached to it, the shadow moved anyway. The room went ice cold. My shadow instantly shoved itself behind James's shadow. For the first time since this nightmare began, they looked genuinely afraid. The strange shadow on the wall stretched unnaturally tall, its grin widening far beyond anything human. Then it spoke. Not out loud. Inside our heads. Found you. Pain exploded behind my eyes. I staggered. James caught my arm immediately, steadying me before I collapsed. What is that? I whispered. His grip tightened around my wrist. I don't know. The creature's shadow rippled like black water. Our shadows trembled violently. Then suddenly, memories that weren't mine flashed through my head. Dark hallways. People screaming. Shadows peeling themselves off walls. A voice whispering. When shadows love deeply enough, they wake up. I gasped and nearly fell again. James's expression sharpened. Emma? My shadow. I breathed. I think it's showing me something. The distorted shadow laughed silently. Then it lunged. Every light in the office shattered at once. Glass exploded. I screamed. But before the thing reached us, James's shadow stepped in front of mine. And for the first time, it separated completely from James's feet. Not flat anymore. Not just a silhouette. It stood upright like a real person made of darkness. Mine followed immediately, grabbing its hand. The two shadows faced the creature together. The entire office trembled. James stared in shock. That's impossible. The monstrous shadow shrieked. Our shadows attacked. The wall itself seemed to come alive as darkness twisted violently across it. Furniture rattled. Papers flew everywhere. The air pressure became unbearable. I clung to James instinctively, and he pulled me against him without hesitation. Above us, the battling shadows crashed into each other like living storms. Then suddenly, I understood. The thing hunting us wasn't after me or James. It was after them. Sentient shadows weren't supposed to exist, and shadows capable of love were apparently something even worse. Or rarer. The creature wrapped around our shadows like smoke. Mine cried out soundlessly. Before I could think, I shouted. Stop trying to separate them. James looked down at me sharply. What? They're not the problem. At that exact moment, my shadow reached desperately toward his. Not fearfully. Lovingly. And James's expression changed. All day we treated them like a disease. A mistake. Something embarrassing. But even now, terrified and hurt, the first thing our shadows did was protect each other. James exhaled slowly. Then quietly. Do it. I blinked. What? His eyes stayed on the wall. Tell them they can stay together. The second the words left his mouth, both shadows froze. Then turned toward us. I swallowed hard. You don't have to break up anymore, I whispered. You can be together. The office fell completely silent. Then light burst across the walls. Not blinding. Warm. Soft. Our shadows intertwined their fingers. And the monstrous shadow screamed. Cracks spread across its body before it shattered into smoke and disappeared completely. The pressure vanished instantly. Everything went still. The city lights outside flickered peacefully through the broken office windows. And on the wall, our shadows curled happily against each other like exhausted lovers finally allowed to rest. My knees nearly gave out from adrenaline. James caught me again automatically. This time neither of us pulled away immediately. His hand remained steady at my waist. Mine still clutched his shirt. We looked at each other in the quiet aftermath. Then his shadow slowly pointed at us. Mine nodded approvingly. I groaned. Even after saving our lives, there's still matchmaking. For the first time, James actually smiled. Not the tiny almost smile from before. A real one. Warm enough to completely transform his face. It hit me so hard I forgot how breathing worked. You know, he said softly, they might not be entirely wrong. My heart stopped. On the wall, our shadows were already celebrating. 3 months later, the company still whispered about me. Just differently now. The terrifying CEO who once made grown executives cry during presentations had apparently developed emotions. People saw him carrying coffee for someone, holding elevator doors open, leaving work before midnight, smiling. The board nearly needed medical attention the first time it happened during a meeting. As for me, I'd somehow gone from invisible admin assistant to the only person in the company who could walk into James Mitchell's office without knocking. Mostly because our shadows refused to tolerate closed doors between us. At this point, everyone had given up questioning it. Especially after the incident. No one except James and I remembered the monstrous shadow clearly anymore. The memories blurred like a fading nightmare. But sometimes late at night, I'd still notice shadows moving strangely in empty places. Watching. Waiting. And every single time, James's hand would quietly find mine. Like a promise. Like protection. Like he already knew. We never signed a new contract after tearing up the old shadow restraint agreement. Instead, our shadows decided to take matters into their own hands. Literally. One evening, after another exhausting day at work, James and I returned to his penthouse carrying takeout. The second we stepped inside, the lights dimmed automatically. Candles flickered across the living room. Soft music played. Rose petals covered the floor. I stared in horror. No. James looked toward the wall. Our shadows stood there proudly beside a carefully arranged romantic dinner table. Mine held up a little sign. About time. James sighed deeply. They broke into my smart home system again. They can do that. At this point I'm done asking what they can't do. His shadow walked over and shoved him lightly toward me. My shadow did the same to me. We stumbled forward simultaneously. James caught my waist. I grabbed his arms. And behind us, both shadows leaned against each other excitedly like gossiping old women. I burst out laughing first. Real laughter. The kind that bent you over slightly because you couldn't stop. James stared at me for a second before laughing too. And just like that, something soft settled warmly between us. No panic. No awkwardness. No bizarre supernatural chaos. Just us. Well, I said finally, glancing at the candlelit setup. I guess our shadows are never going to stop. James looked down at me. Eyes gentler than I'd ever seen them. No, he said quietly. Then he brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. But honestly? His thumb rested lightly against my cheek. I don't think I want them to. Behind us, our shadows immediately started cheering so hard they nearly fell over. I rolled my eyes. Show-offs. James smiled. And this time, when he kissed me, it wasn't because our shadows forced us to. It was because we wanted to.